All right, YouTube is almost up.
Hi, Rabbi Neely. How are you?
Doing well, Joseph. You?
Doing well. Just been busy going back to rabbinical school.
Right.
Getting back into the swing of everything.
That's it's always hard after you've had the time off for the Chagim.
Exactly. I'm gonna have my camera off because I'm working here and other things, but I'm gonna be listening to what you're gonna be talking about.
No problem. Whatever works for you.
Rabbinic school is supposed to be one of the harder grad programs, right?
I've only ever done rabbinic school, so I can't really compare.
I'll say from my experience, because I have another graduate degree, and I find rabbinical school challenging. Especially what makes it so hard is that you have to become proficient in modern Hebrew.
It does require multiple skills that don't always fit together.
Yeah, and plus that then after you become acquainted with Hebrew, then it goes to the Mishnah and Talmud. Then you have the counseling classes. You have to deal with entrepreneur about running a synagogue. You have to deal with so many things. And it's like you have to become a master of many trades.
Exactly. It's not just a single job. Now, most graduate programs and most jobs aren't just single jobs either. It's just unfortunately many graduate programs don't seem to realize that. You know, I know in political science when I was working on my master's, it was very narrow focused on what they expected you to do for the degree. Even if your job might have had if I had gone into political science as a profession, there would have been many other requirements for doing the work. And it's a shame that more graduate programs don't properly prepare people for the full range of activities they'll be required to do for their profession.
To give you a perspective, when I did my master's degree in computer science, it was 30 credits. For rabbinical school, and the Master of Arts in Jewish Studies is 140 credits. So it's a big difference.
I mean, yeah, in terms of time, it usually takes on average about 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's based upon having some knowledge when you come in. You don't usually come in with zero.
Yeah.
But fully worth it. I'll say for myself personally, you know, it was the most amazing 5 years of study I ever had. And I am very happy with how it prepared me for not just my career, but for life. So, you know, if it's the right place for you, then the time goes by too quickly.
And the personal satisfaction, that's what I'm doing it mainly for.
All right. Well, we've got our nice little 5-minute buffer. So let's go ahead and get rolling. And if people come a bit later, that's fine. So we left off with Mishnah Sotah, chapter 2. We finished up Mishnah 1, which began the process of talking about the sacrifice that goes along with the Sotah trial. Remember, Sotah is the legal jargon that's used for the woman that is suspected of adultery, that has gone through all of the rigmarole of chapter 1. Namely, she had to have been warned and she had to have been witnessed being secluded with the man about whom she was warned. And so now we're going to see in chapter 2 more of how the ritual plays out in Jerusalem. Remember as well, by this point, they have already tried to dissuade her from going through with it, that if she is truly guilty, she should have confessed and done away with having to do this long before this point. But we are moving forward. Let me get the entire Mishnah onto one screen. The priest takes an earthenware bowl and pours half a log of water into it from the laver, the kior. I hate the word laver because I don't know how to pronounce it in English. It basically means the water basin that was used for the water that was drawn for hand washing and other elements of the temple service. Rabbi Yehuda says, a quarter of a log, right? So the Tanna Kama, the first voice in the Mishnah tells us that it is half a log. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it's half of a half, meaning a quarter. It turns out he is not supported by the Talmud, but he is consistent. Just as Rabbi Yehuda reduces the amount of writing, so he reduces the quantity of water. Now, we haven't talked about the writing yet. That's coming up. But you'll see that in the writing, he also takes a minimalist view of how much needs to be written on the scroll that will eventually be put, the writing of which will eventually be put into the water. Then the priest enters the temple and turns to his right, where there is a place there, meaning on the floor, that it was a cubit by a cubit, again, about 18 inches wide, a marble tablet to which a ring was attached. He would lift this up, he would take some dust from beneath it, which he puts into the bowl, so that it would be seen on top of the water. As it is said, and of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle, the priest shall take and put it into the water. Now, the phrase, v'natan el hamayim, and put it to the water rather than b'mayim, in the water, is why they are emphasizing that it would be visible on the water, right? Al hamayim. And you'll notice that what used to be a dirt floor in the tabernacle days, in the days of the Mishkan, is now a stone paved floor in the days of the Beit HaMikdash of the temple, but they still had a special flagstone with a ring on it that they could lift in order to take the dirt to use for this ritual. Any questions or comments on this part of the ritual? On to Mishnah 3. He now comes to write the scroll. From what place does he write? Meaning, from where to where inside of chapter 5 does he write? You may remember when we read through chapter 5, it said basically, write these words. But which words are we talking about? The answer from the Mishnah is, from, if no man has lain with you, ... but if you have gone astray while married to your husband, right? Which is the section that is found in verses 19 and 20 of chapter 5. He does not write, then the priest shall cause the woman to swear, but continues, may the Lord make you a curse and an imprecation, and may this water that induce the spell into your body and make your belly swell and your thigh sag. So these are from verses 21 and 22. So basically what is implied, actually, let me give the rest of it here. He does not write, and the woman shall say, Amen, Amen. Now, vis-a-vis Rabbi Yossi says, he makes no omissions. So the argument here is, do you delete the voice of the narrator, or do you leave in the voice of the narrator? Right? If you were to be putting this into a movie script from the book, you would not include, then the priest shall cause the woman to swear. You would just have her swear. So the question here is, do you include the actual words that are the oath, or do you include the whole text of the Torah, including the narrative instructions in between the quotes of the oath that she is being made to swear? The primary voice of the Mishnah is saying you delete the narrative instructions, right? The priest shall cause, or the woman shall say, those parts are omitted. Now, Rabbi Yossi says, no, you include all of them, meaning we're taking the entire block of text. Rabbi Yehuda argues, on the other hand, he writes nothing except, may the Lord make you a curse and an imprecation, and may this water that induces the spell into your body make your belly swell and your thighs sag. And he does not write, and the woman shall say, Amen, Amen. So Rabbi Yehuda says, you don't even need to write the oath part that she is being made to swear. You only need to write the spell part, the curse part, the part that is describing the effects of if she has indeed been unfaithful to her husband. So just make sure we understand in Mishnah 3, there are 3 different opinions. Each are dealing with the text differently. We'll start from the minimalist view of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says you only need to write the actual effect that the water would have on her, because that's the only thing the water is doing, right? The water doesn't make her swear. The water doesn't give the narration. The water just will have the effect if she has been unfaithful. On the maximalist side, we have Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi says, no, if it tells you to write the words, it means write all the words, right? Even the narration, even the instructions, everything. It'd be like, if you were reading out the instructions in a book and it said at the bottom of the page, continued on the next page, you would read continued on the next page, flip the page and keep reading out loud. And the main voice of the Mishnah, the Tanna Kama, the first Tana that is put into the Mishnah, is in between, but not in between in ideology, but is saying, look, we need to have you write everything you say to her, meaning the direct quotes are what are included in these words. These words that are said, those are the words that are written. Just as the priest is not going to say, then the priest shall cause the woman to swear. He's not going to read aloud the instructions while administering the oath. So too, he does not need to write those words onto the scroll. All right. How does that sound? Make sense? So, like I said, all three of these are different ways of looking at the totality of the writing of the words. Are we focused on the effect? Are we focused on the quote? Are we focused on the full written paragraph? And each have merits, but it is the first view that wins the day. All right, mouse, come on, there we go. Mishnah 4. He writes neither on a wooden tablet, nor on papyrus, nor on rough parchment, but on a parchment scroll, right? That it needs to be what we would call a Megillah. That is to say, something that would be appropriate material for writing a Torah on. Why do we know this? As it is said in a scroll, or specifically in Numbers 5:23, Basefer. And just as we call it a Sefer Torah, it has to be a parchment piece that is fit, that it could be used for a Sefer Torah. Nor does he write with a preparation of gum or sulfate of copper, or with anything which makes an impression on the parchment, but with ink, meaning, as it is said, and he will blot it out. That is, writing which is capable of being blotted out. The whole point of the writing on the scroll is that it is going to be erased into the water that she will drink. If the writing was to be an impression on the parchment, if it was actually to be engraved almost, if you were writing on a very soft material with a very sharp instrument, then even when you erased the ink might still be embedded in the impression. And so too the other types of writing that they're talking about here, the gum or the sulfate of copper, these are ink mixtures that are indelible. They will not be erased by the water. And so you have to write it with a mixture that is not water resistant. It has to be water soluble.
Rabbi.
Yes.
So all the ink would literally come off the page?
Yes.
Oh.
It's literally going to be erased into the water. This is why this is used as being an example of how far God would go to reconcile husband and wife, that God is willing to let God's name be erased, which, as you all know, is something that is against the commandments. But for the sake of shalom bayit, for peace between husband and wife, if this is what will reconcile them to each other, then God is okay with having God's name be erased. Any other questions or comments on Mishnah 4? Okay. Just a moment. All right. So, Mishnah 5. To what does she respond, Amen, Amen, right? What exactly is she agreeing to when she is saying Amen? She is saying Amen over the curse and Amen over the oath, right? So she is saying, indeed she has not been unfaithful. And indeed, if she has been, then she agrees that the curse should take effect. Additionally, amen with respect to this man, and amen with respect to any other man. So this is saying that it is not just testing her with the one person that was warned about and which she was witnessed as being secluded with, that by the time she reaches this point, she is saying categorically she has not been unfaithful at all. Not just, you didn't catch me with the right guy, but I've never been with any other guy. Kind of, because never is a funny word. Amen, that I did not go astray as a betrothed girl, or a married woman, or a shomeret yavam, or a woman taken into the yavam's house. Remember, yavam is referring to the Levirate marriage. So what she is saying is that even in these other categories, married woman is one, but also when she was only betrothed, which again, you are still not allowed to be intimate with someone other than your betrothed at that point, nor when she was ready to become to take the place of the wife of the brother-in-law, nor even when she was taken into his house. At no point in any of these other almost like married conditions did she commit adultery. And again, amen, that I have not been defiled, and if I have, may these curses come upon me. Again, sort of summarizing that she indeed has not been unfaithful, and indeed she is acknowledging the curses and their potential. Any questions on that section? Okay. Rabbi Meir says, amen, that I have not been defiled, and amen, that I will not become defiled in the future. Right? Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that the waters become a permanent check, meaning that if she commits adultery sometime in the future, then the waters will kick into effect at that point. That they become almost a what's the term? Not proactive, preventative. That they become almost a preventative measure, meaning that at any point in the future, if she was to be unfaithful, that they would test her at that point as well. Questions or comments? Everybody's very shy tonight. You see, you've all gotten so relaxed in allowing Natan to usually ask questions on your behalf. You need to remember to be able to ask questions of your own. You can't let him shoulder all the work. All right, so Mishnah 6. Continuing with the oath that she is swearing. All agree that she cannot make a stipulation with regard to the time before she was betrothed or after she is divorced, right? If you're not married and not even engaged, then you can't be held liable for having been intimate with someone during that time. And likewise, after your husband divorces you, even if he remarries you, you can't be held liable for what you did while divorced. Meaning, in more detail in the Mishnah, if she secludes herself with a man about whom she was warned, but after being divorced and was defiled, and subsequently her husband took her back, he cannot make a stipulation with her in regard to this. Right? He can't say, have you never been with Mr. Smith, even while you weren't my wife, even while you were divorced from me, right? He has no right to make her take an oath regarding a period when they were not married. This is the general rule, the klal, right? Any with whom she has intercourse and was not prohibited to him at the time, the husband cannot make a stipulation on this. So again, it's not saying that she should be promiscuous. It's not saying that it's a good character trait for her to have dallied with other men before she was engaged. It's not a good trait for her to have perhaps dallied with people during her divorce period. But whether she did or didn't, the husband is not allowed to make her swear regarding this point because she was not his wife in any way, shape, or form during those times. Yes, Aaron.
Hey, Rabbi, I might be wrong, but was there a rule that says if you divorce a woman and she has intercourse that you could not remarry her?
That you are not allowed to remarry her if she has remarried.
Oh, does intercourse make you remarried potentially?
That gets more complicated. Potentially is the right word, but the rabbis did not believe that that should be the methodology of consummating a relationship. So the rabbis assumed that anybody who was doing that, it was just fooling around, that it should not have been considered an actual betrothal because that's not the way Jewish men betroth their wives.
I was watching Shregim, and this came up, and they said for it to happen is you have to have the intent to marry when you do it. But then they went on to say the rabbis assumed that you had the best intent, so it's presumed that you had the intent to marry.
So the rabbis will presume in both directions. So sometimes the rabbis will presume that Jewish men would never engage in what's called znut. Znut would be promiscuity, meaning intercourse with no intention of relationship. So the rabbis would assume that no Jewish man would ever do that. So therefore, if he had intercourse, it must have been for the purpose of taking her as a wife. However, if it is necessary to not create a violation, then the rabbis will look the other way and say, unless there was intentionality, unless there was a declaration that the intimacy was for creating a marriage bond, then it was not. So the rabbis kind of have it both ways depending upon the needs of the situation.
So would it be retroactive then, that intent?
It can be retroactive both ways.
No.
Meaning that the rabbis can retroactively say the sex that you had was not for marriage in certain cases. That comes up in a more complicated discussion about giving a get to somebody. And sometimes they need to fully dissolve, annul the original marriage. And people say, well, what about the sex? Didn't that consummate it even if you're saying the ceremony didn't? And the rabbis say, nope, we just consider the sex they had as being znut, as being promiscuity. So they can turn it back into only promiscuity, and they can also turn what was meant to be promiscuity into a binding relationship. But the idea that the rabbis assume the best about a person is really trying to tell you that you shouldn't be engaging in intimacy without an intention to build a relationship with this person, and really the ultimate relationship, meaning marriage. And if more people did not engage with intimacy with someone except for one that they were married, I think things would be a lot simpler. Even if people only ask themselves, can I imagine myself being married to this person 30 years from now? And if they were honest in answering that question, it would probably cut down on some of the activities that people get up to.
Sorry, one more question, Rabbi. Sorry.
No, never apologize for questions. It's fine.
Does whether or not they're making these assumptions have anything to do with how much intercourse is going on in the community as a whole?
Not exactly, but it was more case by case. However, the question of how much unfaithful or infidelity was going on is definitely going to come up before we are done with the Masechet, before we are done with Sotah.
All right.
The rabbis do indeed become rather alarmed during the days of the Second Temple with how much fooling around is happening.
Rabbi.
Joseph, yes.
Two issues. First of all, is what I'm seeing is that this document at least is giving a lot of leeway for the woman and freedom, which actually is almost like if it is a feminist document.
I don't think anyone would argue it was feminist in the modern sense of the word, but
at that time.
But compared to the way most people read chapter 5 of Bamidbar, yes, this is putting the woman into a much more protected state than she could have been in the capricious, I'm jealous, I'm dragging you off to be tried mentality that some people read chapter 5 as reflecting. So while it's not exactly putting a woman into equal standing, it is certainly carving out and protecting a lot of rights for women under this system.
And the second question I have is, how did the rabbis deal with this issue, but dealing also with in a polygamous relationship?
So polygamy meaning for a husband who had multiple wives,
Yes.
as long as he was actually married to all of his wives in an official and Jewishly appropriate way, then his intimacy with the other wives was not considered to be a problem. However, the rabbis do go into much detail of his obligations to all of his wives, that he is not allowed to treat them differently, and he's not allowed to take away from one to the benefit of others. So again, even in a polygamous situation, the rights of the different wives are heavily protected.
And again, that's revolutionary for the time period that it was written.
There are a lot of things that are in Judaism that might look as being not feminist now, but at the time were absolutely radical. The idea that women could inherit at all under any circumstances was rather unusual. The idea that the damage done to a woman was not different than the damage done to a man in terms of personal injury was different from many cultures and is still to this day. The idea that a woman had been raped should not be punished for it is something that some cultures have still not agreed to, even in the year 2020. So yes, there is much that was radically more liberating and protective of women in a way that really empowered them in the ancient world, and which has allowed us to continue to be kind of at the cutting edge of most cultures in allowing women greater freedom and equality in every aspect of life, up to and including in the modern world, the way that most Jews now see women as fully equal partners throughout not only their personal life, but also our religious life.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so again, you know, the rabbis and the Torah itself may not be the banner that many modern feminists wave, but it really did show a way of how to create greater and greater protection. And also, of course, it bedevils those who want to continue to belittle or to hem in women or take away their rights or their freedoms or equality. But the claim that that is somehow what the Bible says or what tradition says is our tradition has said quite the contrary for a very long time. As we are in now the section of the Torah, Bereshit, where we are reading the story of the creation of the first human, and thus also Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, there are so many misunderstandings that come from those chapters that many people have used as justification for their mistreatment of women and the status of women, that it drives me mad. Because more than 2,000 years ago, at least, we have record of our people understanding those passages very, very differently and in a way that is much more, closer to equality, not full equality, I will grant, but much closer to equality and certainly much closer to respect between the two, between men and women. And whenever someone tries to say, oh, but it's traditional, you know, women never have had these rights, it's, yes, they have. We gave them a lot of rights, not 100%, I agree. And that's something that we are still reconciling, as we've talked about on many other occasions, and of why that is appropriate these days. But really, to try and say that women are like, you know, the puppets of their husbands, and to claim that that is somehow built into the Torah or the Bible is just, sorry. Use your own book if you're another religion and you want to claim that women have that role, but don't point to ours, because those of us who have kept it for 2,000, 3,000 years, that's not the way we've read it. So write your own book if that's the interpretation you want. Aaron.
Hey, Rabbi, when you say this equal rights, are you referring to the same rights or are you referring to something else?
I'm referring that in the Torah, there is much more equal protection and equal rights than was found in the other ancient cultures that surrounded the people of Israel.
Right. The
Now,
obligations are separate, though.
obligations are different, yes. Right. Equal rights, I'm talking about civil and criminal protection. Obligations, meaning whether women were obligated for every commandment, was different, and that was based upon a economic inequality, not a constitutional inequality between the two sexes.
So when you say equal, you mean the same for civil and criminal stuff, right?
Yes.
All right.
Which again is something that has taken a very long time to catch up. I was just reminded recently that it wasn't until the 1960s, for example, that women were allowed to open up their own bank account if they were married. A married woman had to get her husband's permission before she could have her own bank account. But Judaism may have said that, yes, the husband was the primary owner of all property, but certainly allowed for many different stipulations and structures, financial structures, that would allow a woman to own her own property and be in control of it. So yeah, it's amazing how archaic many things in Western culture have been compared to Judaism. All right, let's take a look at chapter 3. We are continuing the process of the offering. He takes her meal offering. Remember, that's the grain offering. By the way, just interesting little vocabulary lesson. The term that's used for a meal offering is a mincha offering. Mincha you may think of as being the afternoon prayer service, which it is, but it is named the afternoon prayer service. It is named mincha because of the meal offering that was offered at that time. So the mincha offering, the meal offering, he takes it out of the basket of palm twigs and places it in a ministering vessel. Right? Remember, that was the upgraded item, and sets it upon her hand. Right? So now she is holding the vessel that is going to be used for the actual offering. And the priest places his hand under hers and waves it. Right? So he is now basically invoking that this is what's happening, that this sacrifice is being done for this woman for this reason. Mishnah 2. He waves it, he brings it near, meaning to the altar. He takes a handful and he turns it into smoke, right? Throwing the handful of grain, it basically gets incinerated. And then the remainder is eaten by the priests. Indeed, for most of the offerings, the bulk of the meal or the meat was eaten by the priests. This was part of how they didn't starve to death. He first gives her the water to drink, and then sacrifices her meal offering. Rabbi Shimon says he sacrifices her meal offering and then gives her the drink. As it is said, and afterwards he shall make the woman drink the water. So he's going in strict chronology of the text. But if he gave her to drink and then sacrificed her meal offering, it is valid. So there's a slight disagreement about the ordering. The rabbis in general, however, hold that the drink happens before the sacrifice takes place. The idea being that she needs to actually drink it for the sacrifice to need to take place. If she refuses to drink, then if you had done the sacrifice first, then the sacrifice would have been in vain if she's now refusing to drink. So they want to make sure that she has officially undertaken the ritual before the next step of the sacrificial process takes place. Questions or comments? Okay, Mishnah 3, rolling right along. If before the writing on the scroll had been rubbed out, she said, I refuse to drink, right? Last minute, whoa, nope, never mind, I'm not going to do it. And the writing had not actually been erased, her scroll is stored away, right? It is put into a geniza. And her meal offering is scattered over the ashes, right? It is taken to the place where the ashes from the altar are put. And her scroll is not valid to be used in giving another sotah to drink. Much like a get, this is a one-person, one-use document. It was written for her. It has to be used for her. And if she won't use it, no one else can. So it just goes into the Geniza. If,
So, Rabbi,
yes?
How can they keep the ink intact in the Geniza?
Well, they don't. It's not kept intact in the sense of like preserved. It's kept intact in the sense that nobody is, deliberately erasing it or using it for another person. But the scroll would eventually be disposed of as we currently do, which is to bury sacred texts that can no longer be used. So the same way that I have a storage area in the synagogue, where if someone brings me printouts of their Torah reading or old Jewish books that are falling apart and that cannot be restored or saved, I will store them in the Geniza, and then from time to time, they will be buried. In fact, we even have a particular spot at the cemetery, which makes that very easy. All right. Okay. If the writing on the scroll has been rubbed out, meaning it was erased into the water, and she said, "I am defiled," the water is poured out and her meal offering is scattered over the ashes. If the writing on the scroll had been rubbed out and she said, "I refuse to drink," they open her throat and make her drink by force. So just in case you thought this was a truly feminist document, no, it's not. Right? It's force feeding someone water is never going to be considered a great look. But let's try and unpack what the issue is here. Right? If she admits to the guilt, if she actually says, "I slept with somebody who wasn't my husband," then there's no point going through with the ritual. Right? The ritual is essentially null and void because the ritual is designed to test. If she has admitted it, there's no need for a test. However, if the text has been erased, meaning we have erased God's name for the purpose of generating the test, then we need to actually have the test take place. This is a linked part of the process. And therefore, simply saying that she wants to refuse to drink without saying that she is guilty or not means that it would be all a waste at this point. And therefore, she will need to drink, whether she wants to or not. If she wants to admit that she is defiled, that's fine. If she wants to maintain her innocence, that's fine, but she'll need to drink. At this point, we are past the point of no return. And we need to have a conclusion one way or the other. Right? We're not erasing God's name for nothing. Questions? Okay, on to Mishnah 4. And I'm going to give this all on the screen because it's, well,
Actually, I have one question though.
Yes.
If she drinks after she admits, though, what are you testing?
No, she doesn't drink if she admits.
Oh, no, I mean, after it's been rubbed into the water, she still drinks if she admits, right?
No. So we have a couple of different steps here, right? So first one is they are about to rub off the ink and she says, "I don't want to drink." Then she doesn't drink. The scroll is put away, writing still intact, and the water is just water, and the grain is simply put on with the ashes. A few minutes later, they finished rubbing out the scroll. And now the water has the ink in it from the writing. And then she says, "I don't want to drink, I did it." Right? I had sex with the guy. Then they take the water, they pour it out, and they put the grain on the ashes, but they don't make her drink. However, option 2, they've erased the ink into the water, they've got it already, and she says, "I don't want to drink." They say, "Too late. Either admit that you did something wrong or drink. And if you won't drink, we'll make you drink." Right? Once the erasure happens, we are getting a resolution here.
All right.
And again, if she admits it, we have a resolution. Make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Robert.
Okay, that's okay. It's not a simple process. It's not something we do, nowadays. It's not like you've ever had a chance to watch this. All right, so what is the effect? She had barely finished drinking when her face turns yellow, her eyes protrude, and her veins swell. And those who see her exclaim, remove her, so that the temple court should not be defiled. Right. So if she dies in this area, then that becomes a primary source of tumah, of ritual impurity. So they want to make sure she is taken from the area. But you'll notice that they are talking about this having an immediate effect. However, if she had merit, right, if she was a meritorious person, apart from the infidelity, it causes the water to suspend its effect upon her. Some merit suspends the effect for 1 year, some merit suspends the effect for 2 years, and some merit suspends the effect for 3 years. Hence, Ben Azai said, a person must teach his daughter Torah, so that if she has to drink the water of bitterness, she should know that the merit suspends its effect. All right, before we get to Rabbi Eliezer in the rebuttal on this, let's try and understand what we're talking about here. Okay, merit. The girl has studied Torah, for example, and therefore she has the merit of learning Torah. So that merit is acting almost as a protection, right? How could we expect a girl who had learned to feel the full effects of this so quickly? Instead, she has to use up her merit before the effect would happen. And so that's the basic idea here. And Ben Azai says, aha, therefore you need to teach her Torah so that it will suspend the effect. Or there's a different way to understand Ben Azai, which is to say you have to teach the girl Torah so that when she is grown up and she knows that she's an adulteress and she drinks the water and she sees that nothing happens, she'll know it's not because the water doesn't test her, but she'll know it's because she has merit. And therefore she will not think, I got away with it, but she'll know that it is going to catch up with her. Right? So Ben Azai is basically trying to say, you have to educate your daughter so that way she can be properly aware of what's going on in this circumstance. Although I would argue that what he's really trying to say is you have to educate your daughter so that she'll understand Torah and not get into a circumstance like this. Rabbi Eliezer views this with a different lens. Rabbi Eliezer says, whoever teaches his daughter teaches her lasciviousness, right? Licentiousness, right? Basically, if you teach your daughter Torah, you're teaching her to be promiscuous. Now, what's his logic? His logic is, if you're teaching her Torah and she knows that merit will suspend, then she may think that the merit will let her escape the punishment of being an adulteress, and therefore she might be more likely to become an adulteress. How are we doing there? People following the logic of the two different opinions? Right? Teach her and she'll avoid it. Teach her and she'll use it as some sort of protection. Okay. Rabbi Joshua is going to say a more general statement. And again, this is where we see that the opinions of all the rabbis are not exactly what you would call feminist. Rabbi Joshua says, a woman prefers 1 kav of food and sexual indulgence to 9 kav and sexual separation. All right, what's he saying here? He's saying that women would rather have a little bit of food and plenty of sex than plenty of food and no sex. As opposed to the Victorian puritanical ideas that are found a lot in American and some European cultures that say that women never like sex and women don't want sex and women have to be, convinced to it, blah, 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 blah. The rabbis believed that women had a sexual appetite. Some saw it as perfectly normal and healthy. Some saw that as, in fact, the fulfillment of the section from the Torah that we read for Bereshit, where it says after the eating of the fruit that she will continue to have a desire for her husband, basically meaning despite the pain of pregnancy and childbirth. And some, like Rabbi Joshua, say women have too much of a sexual appetite, that in fact they are hungrier for that than they are for food. And therefore you need to be prepared for, preventing them and teaching them how to control those appetites so that they do not get into trouble. Hot water, you might say. Sorry, I don't have a rim shot built into Zoom. Everyone see the opinion that he's putting out there?
Yes.
Okay. Rabbi Joshua used to say as well, a foolish pietist, a cunning wicked person, a female separatist or female Pharisee, and the blows of the separatists or blows of the Pharisees bring destruction upon the world. All right, so what in the world is he talking about here? Well, what he's talking about here, and let me just roll back up because the Hebrew is very striking in his little couplings, right? A chassid Sotah, right, which is basically a stupid, pious person, is somebody that is, for example, used in discussion, who, when seeing a drowning person on Shabbat, would run to their rabbi asking whether it was okay to save them, right? They are an idiot, and they think they're being pious, but they're actually being foolish. And those are people that, he says, bring destruction on the world. A cunning, wicked person is easier to figure out, right? It's one thing to deal with a stupid person that is wicked, but if they have a lot of cunning, if they are, very clever, then their evil is much more damaging to the world, right? I'd much rather deal with a stupid, wicked person than a smart, wicked person. And certainly if you've ever seen any of the modern superhero movies, you'll know that the big bad guy is always going to be the clever guy rather than just the biggest guy in the room. Because just being big and strong and mean doesn't make you a real threat. Being clever makes you a much more damaging threat. Now, the last two are require a little bit more explanation, right? So you may have heard at some point that the rabbis were the Pharisees. That is not technically true. The rabbis, in fact, are most likely an outgrowth of the different religious factions that were there during the time of the Second Temple. One of those factions being the Pharisees, with whom the rabbis agreed on some points. They agreed in the resurrection of the dead. They agreed in the oral Torah that there was such a thing. However, the Pharisees were notorious within rabbinic literature, not just the literature of other religions. The Pharisees in particular were notorious for their outlandish displays of piety. As one person put this to me once, they were spiritual materialists. They wanted to show you how spiritual they were. So they had the biggest, most ostentatious tefillin, right? They would go out of their way to bow and scrape and put on displays of piety in order to show you how amazingly spiritual they were. The argument here is that for a woman who was one of them, this would get even more out of hand, even more of an ostentatious display of spirituality. Similarly, the blows would be referring to people who would go in through self-flagellation. They'd hit themselves to show how humble and pious they were. But of course, they were hitting themselves in a way so that you would know how humble and pious they were, which is in fact not humble or pious. but merely a display. It was a performance. And all of these types of behaviors are very, very bad for the world. Yes, Aaron.
Rabbi, isn't part of the Mishnah or the traditions passed down through the Pharisees?
Not officially, right? So again, people often conflate, put the Pharisees and the rabbis in the same basket. But although there were many similarities, both of teachings as well as traditions, they are not considered to be the exact same thing as the actual Masorah, the actual tradition.
Right. But Hillel and Gamliel and all them were Pharisees, right?
They are not called Pharisees explicitly.
Oh.
I like to think of it as they would have caucused with the Pharisees rather than the Sadducees. Right? If they were putting together a coalition in a modern parliament, the rabbis and the Pharisees would have had more in common than the rabbis and the Essenes, or the rabbis and the Sadducees, or the rabbis and the Sikari. But they're not identical political parties one for one.
Right. But you had no Sadducees on the Sanhedrin, though, right? Where you would have had Pharisees, right?
You would have had people that were more likely to have had Pharisaic tendencies, I guess would be the right way to put it.
So who were they? Then who were the people like Hillel and Gamliel? Because I thought there was only about 4 groups of people. You had 2 that were pretty much irrelevant. Then you had the Pharisees and the Sadducees.
Well, not everybody was hyper partisan.
Right. But who are these?
So the rabbis reserve. So, I mean, again, this is a definitional issue, right? The rabbis reserve the term in the rabbinic literature of Pharisees. They reserve that term for the people that go too far. Now, does that mean that there was a bright line that the Pharisees that the rabbis are calling the Pharisees wore a big P on their chest that said, "I'm a Pharisee"? No. Sorry, the P is because of the pay for the Hebrew. But does that mean that rabbis and the Pharisees would have been more of a spectrum? Yes, that's the better way to look at it. And the rabbis and the Pharisees, like I say, they shared much, but it's not fair to call the rabbis Pharisees when the rabbis did not call themselves Pharisees.
Yeah, right. No, I was just wondering, who was this, the group during the time of Hillel? Because I thought you had those who followed Herod, you had the secular ones, then I thought you had the Pharisees and the Sadducees. But I'm not aware of anybody who did not fit within those 4 groups.
Well, that's because most historians like to just lump people together based upon the writings of Josephus. But the fact is, Josephus had a particular methodology that he wanted to promote, and the rabbis have their own interpretation. And they, by and large, reserve the term Pharisee mostly for a criticism of people that are overly ostentatious in their displays of religiosity.
All right. When did the rabbis come around, though? I thought that term wasn't used till after.
So that is another more complicated question, right? The first person that we get using the term rabbi as a regular title within rabbinic literature is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Which is after the destruction of the Second Temple. But does that mean that people before that weren't called rabbi? We seem to have evidence that some were. However, it wasn't an official and consistent title that was being used, which is why, like you mentioned, Hillel and Shammai, neither of whom are given within rabbinic literature the title rabbi. So it's complicated to know exactly what their life was like. Unfortunately, we don't have enough writings from those time periods. We have rabbinic literature, we have Josephus, we have some things from Philo, we have some interpretations which were heavily suspect and shaded by later ideas of the Christian writings. So we don't have a large body of material to help us understand exactly what the cultural divisions were like. But the rabbis viewing themselves, which is what I've mostly been trying to share through our Mishnah class, the rabbis viewed themselves as not being identical with what they viewed as the Pharisees.
And didn't Gamliel obtain the title Rabban?
So that is a later Gamliel, I think you're thinking of.
Oh.
All right. Let me just
All
do a quick reminder here for section 5. Yeah, let's go ahead and read Mishnah 5, and then we'll call the night. Rabbi Shimon says, merit does not suspend the effect of the bitter waters. And if you say that merit does suspend the effect of the bitter waters, you discredit the water in the case of all the women who drink it and defame the pure women who drank it, since people were say they were defiled, but their merit cause suspended the effect. Right? So Rabbi Shimon is putting a very real issue on the table and saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. If you say it's suspended, then that means every woman who drinks will either be considered to have been impure, but have had the merit, and that's what's causing the suspension, or everyone will assume that the waters are just a big joke and that it doesn't do anything, right? If it doesn't cause a reaction when the person who's guilty drinks it, then everyone is going to assume that it's fake. And if it doesn't cause a reaction for people who believe that it truly works, they may not think the woman is innocent. They'll think that she just has merit, but she's still actually an adulteress. So as soon as you separate the effect from the drinking, the whole thing breaks down. Now, Rabbi says, merit suspends the effect of the bitter waters, but she never bears a child or thrives. Rather, she gradually becomes disfigured and finally dies through that death. So he sort of compromises. He says, merit keeps you from dying outright, but you don't get pregnant and you don't even look healthy. It clearly begins to have an effect, but you've got time to put your affairs in order. And he tries to mitigate this in both directions, to say it's not exactly getting you off the hook, but it's also not exactly condemning you to an instant death. All right, any last minute comments or questions on that last part, on that compromise? I just want to point out in the modern world, sometimes we still have the same issue. And you know, those of you that work in the law may be aware of this, that if somebody is declared not guilty, many people will continue to say, well, he just had a good lawyer. Mm-hmm. Or they'll say, you know, he's probably guilty anyway, they just couldn't prove it. And it doesn't actually clear the person's name. And the whole point of the Sotah ritual was meant to clear somebody's name or establish guilt without any doubt. And if you have a legal system that doesn't do that, then it becomes very messy for everybody involved. And especially in the ancient world or even the pre-modern world, where your reputation in your community was everything, you need something that can reconcile the doubt. All right, with that, we will say goodnight. And hopefully I'll see everybody for Mishnah again next week. For those of you that also enjoy the Pathways to Judaism class, that is back on tomorrow at 6 o'clock.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Rabbi. Good night.
Good
Good night.
Good night.